Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nakad's Bookish Cafe. Today I am here to give you 5 cozy fall reading recommendations. Alright guys, it is warm outside, but we don't care. It is fall time here in the reading community, and I know we are all super excited about it. I know that I am. And I also know that a lot of us really enjoy reading both spooky and cozy books. So I decided to film 2 different videos, one in which I talk about cozy books and another where I talk about more spooky books. This one will be talking about the cozy books. These are just books that I think are perfect for the fall season. Most of them are not really scary. I would really only say that one of them has like a few spooky scenes throughout the series, but the rest of them really shouldn't scare you. I am someone who is definitely a scaredy cat, so I think that if I can handle them, most people would be able to handle them as well. But as always, because of some of the themes in this story, please take care of yourself and look at any trigger warnings that may be associated with them. I will admit that I struggled a little bit with this list. I feel like I struggle with this list every single year. I call myself a fall girl all the time, but then when I look through the books that I've read, I'm like, none of these are giving fall vibes, you know? I'm looking through all the books that I've read in the last year, and I'm like, none of them really have any sort of aesthetic to them. I guess I'm just the kind of person who reads a bunch of random books and none of them have a seasonal aesthetic. None of them are giving spring, summer, fall, winter, and it always makes these videos very hard for me to make, but I love making them and I love seeing them. So I tried my hardest and fought for my life to find 5 books to recommend to you today. If you have any recommendations of books that you love to read in the fall that give cozy vibes, I would love for you to leave those down below in the comments, both for my benefit as well as the benefit of your fellow followers. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into book number 1. The first book I'm going to be talking about is the one book that I don't physically own. I went ahead and unhauled the first 2 books after I decided to continue the series via audiobooks. It is a relatively long series, so I didn't feel like investing in it despite absolutely loving the series, and that is the Veronica Speedwell series, specifically A Curious Beginning by Diana Raybourn. It is the first book in this series. This is a historical mystery series in which we are following both Veronica as well as her partner in crime, let's call him Stoker. And at the beginning of this series, we are following Veronica as she has become a independent woman for the first time after her guardian has passed away, and she has plans on traveling the world and continuing her study and capture of rare butterflies. However, before she is able to set off on her journey, a man approaches her and lets her know that she is in danger and needs to come with him to London. She agrees because she needs to go to London anyway, and it saves her, you know, some money to just go along with this rich guy. But then he drops her off at Stoker's place and tells Stoker to watch over him. And then unfortunately for her and Stoker, this guy goes off and gets himself killed. And they're like, what's going on here? So because Stoker suspects that she had something to do with his murder, and the police seem to think that Stoker had something to do with the murder, the 2 of them decide to team up together to figure out what actually happened. This is all what happens in the first story, and then obviously as we continue throughout the series, we watch them solve other mysteries. I have only read the first 3 books of the series, but I've had a wonderful time with it. I feel like historical stories set especially in like England just give fall vibes because everything seems so dreary. Sorry, England, you're just like a very dreary setting, especially when we're dealing with like a historical setting. It just kind of fits the fall vibe. We also have the mystery aspect of this, and I know a lot of people like to read mysteries and thrillers and horror during this time of year, but these mysteries are not too gruesome, and also our two characters provide a lot of comedic relief throughout the story. So despite it dealing with rather serious matters, there is a very lighthearted feel to this series. There is also a bit of a slow burn romance between our two characters, and I just absolutely love the relationship that is building between the two of them. I've also always enjoyed the side characters that are presented. I will admit that when it comes to this series, I do enjoy the characters and the relationship building a bit more than the mysteries, but the banter between our two characters definitely makes these addictive and fun reads. Up next, we have another series that a lot of people probably already know about. I know I was late to the party with this series, so if you too have been hesitating to read this, maybe you think you're too old for it now because it's YA. Trust me, I read it, what was it, last year or the year before? I never remember when I read books, but I still absolutely loved it, except for the ending. I'm with the majority that the ending was not great, but the series is still well worth reading, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a YA, slightly paranormal, magical realism story where we are following 5 different characters, our main character being Blue, and she is a member of a family of psychics. She herself, however, does not seem to have psychic abilities, but she seems to be kind of a battery to other psychics where they can strengthen their own abilities by being in her presence. So every year her family goes to the graveyard to kind of watch this procession of spirits of who will go ahead and die in the next year, a very grim annual activity. And she goes along with them so that she can strengthen their ability to see these spirits. And then this year, for the first time, she happens to see a ghost, which she has never done before. And this boy kind of approaches her and she's like, what the heck? She tries to put it behind herself and just kind of forget about it until she sees him in the real world, and she's like, oh crap, I better intervene. And that is how she meets Gainsey and the other Raven boys. They seem to be trying to find the final resting place of some sort of king, because whoever finds it is supposed to be granted a wish. And we just follow them as they kind of get into trouble, deal with spirits and ley lines, as well as foes who are trying to find this king before them. This story definitely gives fall vibes. It's dark and gloomy. Our characters are flawed and imperfect, yet thoroughly likable. The story has a lot of twists and turns throughout it, a lot of unexplainable events. There's a lot of things in here that will catch you off guard and will push you to continue reading the series. It's definitely a bingeable series. Maggie Stiefvater has a beautiful writing style that's very haunting and perfect for a story like this. It's really the kind of story that you want to be reading on a cold, gloomy fall night with the rain pouring and a nice spooky ambiance video going. I really did love this series. It doesn't show in this one because I read the first book from the library and then bought it later, but all the other books in the series I did annotate, which is relatively rare for me, but I love the writing so much that I just had to highlight some of those lines. They really are beautiful, and if you're looking for a series to get into this fall season, this should should definitely be at the top of your list if you have not jumped on the bandwagon like the rest of us. Next, we have another YA story, because I just think YA stories are a little better at the cozy aspect when it comes to spooky fall vibes, just because, you know, they don't get as gruesome as adult novels. And I, of course, want to recommend the well-beloved Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. And this, I guess, is no longer a standalone. I believe there is a second book coming out. It is not out yet, otherwise I would have read it, because I will definitely be getting to that as soon as possible once it comes out. But in this book, we are following a young trans man who is trying to prove to his family that he is a real bruja. And in order to do that, he needs to perform a sort of a ritual where he helps a spirit pass on to the next life. And so he summons a spirit. He's like, hey, I'm gonna help you go to the next life. And the spirit's like, what do you mean? Why am I dead? And the character is like, I don't know. And so the spirit's like, hey, I'm gonna need you to help me figure out who killed me, because I have some friends out there who could be in danger as well. And this spirit actually happens to be the spirit of a bad boy that goes to school with our main character. And as we follow them on their little journey to figure out who has killed this young man, the two of them grow closer and closer together. I really enjoyed the relationship between the two of them. I really enjoyed the commentary on a trans person trying to find their place in a family that is very heavily controlled, or at least the roles within the family are very heavily controlled by gender. I also really enjoyed our characters' relationship with their cousin and the support their cousin provided. And while I felt like the mystery aspect wasn't overly unpredictable, I really did enjoy the way that this story ended. And I really enjoyed this one scene where one of the characters was acting very protective over the other one, and I was like, woohoo, they like each other. So I had a really fun time with this story. It definitely gives fall spooky season vibes, because we're dealing with people hanging out in cemeteries and dealing with ghosts and rituals and neglected children that are hanging out under bridges and just trying to survive. And it's just really giving the right vibes and everything. So if you haven't read this book, you definitely should get on it, especially before the second book comes out, whenever that happens to be. And even if you're looking for just a book that has good trans representation or even Hispanic representation, you will definitely find it in this one. Up next, we have a very long series. And this book, out of all of them, probably has some of the most grotesque scenes in it, and the one where you will most definitely want to check out trigger warnings, because the author definitely doesn't hold back on some of the terrible things that happen to our character throughout this series. And the first book is called Heaven's Official Blessing, Volume 1. Actually, all the books are called Heaven Official Blessing. To be honest, and this is by Mo Xiang Tong Shui, and this is a 8-book series. You can see the whole thing standing here beside me. This is a Donmi, I can never remember how it's pronounced, but it's essentially a boy love story translated from Mandarin. These stories are often originally written on online platforms and then transferred into these volumes, which does make them a little difficult to read in their physical form, because the volumes often stop at such random points in the story. So I always tell people that if they're planning on going into this series, it's a good idea to plan to binge it, because I didn't do that for the first few volumes, and it definitely impacted my enjoyment, because I would jump into the next book and be like, what's going on? I have no idea. We seem to be in the middle of some random events. And then once I started reading it more consistently, it had a better flow to it. Essentially, in this story, we are following Shilan, and he was a prince of a prosperous nation. He was well beloved, and at the age of 17, he ascended to a godhood, which no one was surprised by. He was just so good. He was so talented, so intelligent, just a kind, good-hearted person. However, his early years in godhood did not go very well for him. He made some pretty serious mistakes that caused him to fall. and then he rose to godhood again, and then very quickly fell again. And at the beginning of this story, we are following him as he ascends for the third time. Throughout the series, we are getting back flashes to the 800 years that he has lived, a very traumatic 800 years. Our man has gone through a lot. However, here in the present, during his third ascension, he meets up with the Crimson Flower Ghost King, San Long. And this is a very feared ghost, one of the most powerful, the one even the gods don't want to mess with. But San Long wants to be best friends with Shilong because San Long worships Shilong and has for many years, and has waited for his opportunity to become a part of Shilong's life and to help him break this curse of bad luck that he has been living under. And so throughout this series, we follow the two of them as their relationship grows stronger, as they battle different ghosts and ghouls and other ghost kings, and maybe even a few gods with bad intentions. There's a lot of drama in here. There's a lot of different characters. There's a lot of time jumping. So that's really why I say try to binge the series, because you may sometimes get confused if you wait too long. This book definitely took some brain cells for me, to be honest, but it is such an interesting read. You really never get bored because there's always something new and dramatic happening. This is a slow burn romance. I'm talking, you gotta wait till like book 8 for the characters even to like acknowledge that they are like together. So slow burn to the max. And one of the reasons I want to put this under cozy is just because our character is so optimistic despite what he has gone through. He is someone who is always willing to sacrifice himself for others, which is not always a good thing, but it makes him a very good character to follow, if not a slightly naive character to follow. On top of it, this book, or this series, has quite a bit of humor in it, which I think adds a lot of levity to a lot of the darkness that is throughout this series. There are plenty of times where this story had me laughing out loud. So I think that the humor kind of helps tip it a little bit more to the cozy aspect, especially since there's a few domestic moments throughout here where Shilong is just taking care of his shrine, and he's trying to take care of his friends and maybe other ghosts that he's helped along the way. So there's definitely, you know, some cute moments throughout this series. I definitely want to read more from this author and more of these Danmei stories. I have not gotten around to it yet, but hopefully I will get to it soon because they are a lot of fun to get to. If you have any recommendations for ones that you have really loved, I know there are lots of them out here. I would love to hear your recommendation. This series, as I mentioned, is completed and all 8 volumes have been translated to English. All right, guys, on to the final book. We have another young adult. I'm 90% sure this is a young adult story, maybe leaning slightly new adult, but we are talking about The Witch King by H.E. Edgman. This is by a queer Indigenous author, and it is a duology, so a short series if you want to just binge through it this season. And we are once again following a trans male main character. In this case, this character is also a witch who has escaped the fairy realm to live with their new friend, a young Indigenous woman, because this is the only way that they could live as themselves. As a witch in the fairy kingdom, they were expected to become the wife of the prince, which they didn't want to do because they don't want to be anyone's wife and they don't want to have anyone's children because they identify as male. However, at the beginning of the story, this this prince shows up and drags our character back to the Fae Kingdom because his throne is being threatened by his cousin, and he feels the only way that he can solidify his right to rule is to marry our main character. Now, our prince has been adopted, so he's not the biological child of the king and queen, which is why his rule is in question. And our prince Amir used to be best friends with our main character Wyatt, and throughout this series we kind of watch them as they turn from like an enemies to friends to lovers situation. They are definitely enemies at the very beginning because Amir is asking Wyatt to do something that he does not want to do and is actually very bad for him and could be very harmful to his sense of self and his mental health. But along the way, things get more complicated when the other witches ask Wyatt to act as their spokesperson, because a lot of the witches here in this Fae realm are being oppressed compared to other Fae, and they're like, hey, if you're gonna become the future ruler beside the king, maybe you could speak on our behalf. And Wyatt is like, I didn't ask to be your guys' savior. I don't want to rule. I don't want to be queen. I don't want to be king. I don't want to be anything. I just want to live my life. I'm like 18 years old, guys, so let's all just calm down. But along the way, they kind of learn to do what they can. I would say definitely at the beginning they were a bit of a selfish character, and it took me a while to really get on board with this character. I would say I didn't like them actually for the majority of this first book, and did like the second book, The Fae Keeper, a lot more than this first book. But I do definitely think that it's really good on the commentary front when it comes to trans representation as well as oppression of specific groups. I think that as far as the fall vibes go, mostly just because we're dealing with fae and we're dealing with witches, it's definitely giving fall vibes just with those creatures involved. The second book definitely gets a little bit more intense, where we start to involve other fae kingdoms as well, so the story really builds from here. This book has quite a lot of representation throughout. A lot of the side characters are queer as well. We have different types of diversity as well when it comes to racial diversity throughout the story. As you can see, our main character seems to be white, but his love interest is black, and then his best friend, as I mentioned, is indigenous. So we have all that representation going on. We have a kind of sapphic relationship going on the side as well. So lots of good stuff going on here. I know this author has some other books out as well that I think would definitely be good for the fall time, and I definitely need to get around to checking those out. But if you are looking for kind of a fae story that involves a lot of commentary that is very relevant to today's world, then I think this series is definitely one that you should check out. All right, guys, so those are the 5 books I suggest you check out this fall if you are looking for fall vibes but don't want anything too spooky or scary. All of these books are amazing. As I said before, if you have any recommendations, please feel free to leave them down below. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!